Welcome to Dreamed It, Then Real Lifed It, the podcast where we dive deep into the journey from vision to reality. I'm Kelly Jackson, your guide on this path of self-discovery, transformation, and intentional living. Here, we explore everything from mindset shifts and personal growth to spiritual alignment and entrepreneurship, sharing insights, stories, and actionable wisdom to help you live a life in harmony with your dreams. Every episode will dig into what it means to not only dream big, but to actually consciously create the life you envision. Let's turn your dreams into real life. Hey guys, before this episode gets started, I want to share something that happened. I came into the studio and batch recorded 2 episodes. This episode that you're about to listen to was actually intended to drop last week. And when I was at the recording studio and exporting the episode, I did get the warning sign that clipping had occurred. I thought I knew what that meant. I really thought that I had run into that before, went and, asked the people who know the software way better than me who work here. And they had explained it was something to do with sound and everything would be okay. That's what I thought. I didn't double check. So I went ahead and exported it. I did take the USB drive, put it on my computer, push play, made sure that I heard the recording, right? And so then I delete it from the recording studio computer. Well, when I got home to upload this, I realized that it literally clipped the episode. It clipped it. The second half of the episode, or however much after, was not there. And I was like, oof, yeah, okay, I didn't double check that. So instead of trying to panic and finish it, I realized this episode could be pushed back a week. The other episode I recorded, I would go ahead and it was called the archive, or it was Invisible Threads, the decentralized art archive. And it's basically about the archive arriving right on time. So check out that episode if you didn't already. This is what I want to tell you. I had to come back into the recording studio the following week and kind of pick up where I left off. Honestly, a week's gone by. I don't even remember exactly how I've finished that conversation. But I guess it doesn't matter because this is the way we're just going to say, like, this is how the cookie crumbles. This is what we got. So we're just going to roll with it. And I listened to the episode or the part of it that I got on the way to the recording studio, and I'm going to channel the energy of what I was recording at the time and do my best to finish the episode essentially 2 weeks later, a week later, maybe a week and a half later, something like that. So luckily this episode is, I guess every episode I talk about, but this one in particular, this is about Mis Sombras. And so this is literally, it's my work. It's what I do. It's part of my identity of who I am, of what's made me who I am. I'll talk about that in the episode. So enjoy, and do keep in mind that at some point I did cut myself off and now I'm jumping back in. So enjoy, and I'll see y'all at the end of the episode. Welcome back to the show. Something really exciting happened on July 10th. Of this year, 2026. The first guide in the second generation of Mis Sombras was introduced to the world. And that came through an art show that was a collective gathering of 21 different artists in and around the Baton Rouge. And this was the idea of Jay. I'm going to put his information in the link in show notes so you can learn more about it. But Jay, and I know him from a painting group, the Call to Artist. We do paint parties together, and I've gotten to know him over the years. He had invited me and all these other artists to participate in this show using these televisions sets that he had collected off the side of the road, and he had taken them apart and basically gave us each the frame and like, do something with it. And so the name of the show is Tell a Vision, and it's remarkable. And it's actually still up in downtown Baton Rouge through August 14th, which is why it was important that we have this talk right now, because there's still a chance for you to go see and enjoy and experience this entire show in downtown Baton Rouge. Again, I'm going to put the details in the link in the show notes so that you can know where to go. So when I had this opportunity and I had this giant TV, it was literally when we went to a party at Jay's house for everyone to collect their TVs and all of this. And he had let us know ahead of time his idea, told everybody about it. And so then we had this invitation to go to a party at he and his wife's house and choose our TV. And he had him span across a couple rooms in the house. And when he and I were walking around, I don't remember if he noticed, he mentioned it, I said something, but there was a giant TV. It was a big one. I think it was might have even been the biggest one there. And Jay said the reason I knew that was because he's like, somebody's got to take the big one. I was like, I'll take the big one. And I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do with the big one, but I said I would take it. And I think what appealed to me was he had replaced the screen with a piece of foam board, actually, which was appropriate for the use of what he was doing because of the shape and everything of the TV. And it was this lavender color. And purple has always been one of my favorite colors. If y'all listen to one of my birthday episodes the first year, you would have learned that my very first car was purple, like LSU purple. So I love purple. So I think that may have been part of what drew me to this particular TV. So anyway, we had several months before the deadline to return the TV with our artwork. And Jay had even kind of said when I was picking up the TV, one of your little creatures would be neat on there. One of those things you draw, And I was like, you know what? I think you're right. And here's the thing. So this episode is about Mis Sombras, but we're going to get into what it's about. I actually don't even know where this story begins. So that's why where the Mis Sombras story begins. So I'm starting with the relevance of why we're even talking about this right now. And then it's going to unfold as we go. So I had this for a little while with the thought, this being the television set, with the thought that a guide would go on there. Well, the first generation of Mis Sombras was the first 13 guides, and I released those at a solo art show I did on February 24th of 2024 under the full moon. It was spectacular. And that was when the first 13 guides were all introduced. The original artwork was on the paintings or on the canvases or whatever material. Not everything was a canvas. One of them's on the back of a stop sign, for example. So it's all reclaimed materials in some way, shape, or form. And then the idea was always that I would release more, because even at the time that I did that show, I probably had 100 of the sketches in my journals and sketchbooks. So I always knew there are more. I just wasn't quite clear on the timeline or the way that they would come out. But what I had said from the beginning, I think I originally was hoping or thinking or imagining this would happen a lot sooner. Maybe like within a couple months, I would be releasing the next 13. It was always, I knew I wanted to release them 13 at a time. And then after 1 year, so I do think I was thinking that like every 3 months or something, I would release 13 more that first year. And then by the end of the year, I would have a traditional deck, right? 52, so that I could have some sort of cards with them. That was a whole nother spin off of what was going to be birthed from this world that I was creating. But it initially started with the introduction of the guides. And so that was part of my thinking of why I would release 13 at a time. Now, I did not end up releasing any more in 2024. I did not release any more in 2025. And when this opportunity presented itself in 2026, I realized now it's time. They're ready to be born into the physical. And so I want to talk a little bit about what my process is and what my relationship is with Mis Sombras and how it started. And, at the time, I think I thought I was simply drawing these strange little creatures. They had weird eyes. They had odd proportions, faces that didn't quite belong to this world. They were whimsical. They were approachable. They weren't being designed for a children's book. They weren't mascots. And they weren't monsters, okay? They weren't, even though sometimes people call them that, which is fine because everyone has a different perception. They felt like an intuitive being that was just like my hand was just translating whatever was coming into my mind, is the best way to say it. And I would keep doodling, sketching until it was like, oh, there you are. And then sometimes that would just be a face or a head. It wasn't always a complete body. And we'll get back to why that's relevant later. But in my little sketchbooks and journals, and it was always really clear the difference between if I was sketching or doodling or drawing something that was just another kind of inspiration, or if it belonged within this world that was revealing itself, that was developing, that was being created. I could feel the difference. I could tell the difference. I'll give you an example. So I like to do these Inktober challenges. So like in October, they have these challenges on, for instance, Instagram, and they call it Inktober, Inktober. And they'll give you a different prompt for each of the 31 days of October. And then each day you draw your sketch for that day. And of course, people can post them for other people to see. It's just something I like to participate in my journal. Although I guess I have shared them before, but not necessarily like as part of the thing every day. Anyway, I do some really cool things because they give you really neat prompts, and it's prompted me to create some really neat beings. And some of them are beings. Again, they're not even like humans. They're made up in my mind. However, they don't feel like they have the same energy as the Mis Sombras, even though they're imaginative, they're mystical, they're mythical, they're not real, so to speak. It's not like I'm drawing a giraffe, a dolphin, a tiger, right? They're like, either whatever they are, they still belong in a different world, or they're still not a part of this world. They're not born from this world. And that distinction matters. But here's the fun thing. Since I'm talking about Inktober, now I created something one time in Inktober that became a world of its own. If you've ever looked at my Instagram, my personal Instagram, which is at BE_whatchawant, WATCHAWANT, be what you want. The very first pin post says My Life in Illustrations, and it is this 5-panel, I would call it like a vignette of different phases of someone's journey. And the little being, which is representative of our soul, it's what's there. It's not human. It's you can go look and see for yourself what it is. Well, that creature, that spirit, that came from an Inktober prompt, and the prompt was vessel. And the way I interpreted this was that same being, and it was in the way where we would be pregnant. So it looked to be pregnant, and it actually had like a unicorn horn, or like a narwhal horn, and it was like this, and it was coming right out of like the third eye area, or maybe the crown chakra, and then it had this belly, and vessel was the prompt, and it had the same kind of tail, whatever you want to call it, but I loved it so much, and it was speaking to me so much that a whole world, a non-verbal world, a world without words, but a storytelling world, a world that was capable of translating a really serious or really heavy or really vulnerable or really specific or really transformational type of message without ever using a word. And I realized that because this was ageless, genderless, raceless, like it was neutral, that it was such a beautiful tool to narrate these stories that I wanted to narrate. And I could use expression and body language to show emotion, and I didn't have to have the words. And I'm a writer, and y'all know I'm like the person that writes captions and then they say like, you've reached your character limit. Okay. I mean, I look at the podcast. I mean, we're almost on episode 100. Obviously, I like to talk too. Okay. So I like to write. I like to talk. So for me to say, hey, I created, or it emerged from me, this character, this being that is capable of storytelling. Like I can use it and we can tell stories without ever saying a word. That's powerful. That's powerful. But then that came from an Inktober. But again, it didn't belong with Mis Sombras. Like they have different energy. Just like I recognized, wait, this vessel is a vessel. Maybe what that vessel was pregnant with was not a literal baby in the way we think of it, but it's at the solar plexus, right? And it's personal power. And it's this idea that like, I can take this and use it as a vessel to communicate a message. And I've created other stories with that character that have never been publicly released, but it's a powerful storyteller IP that's in my What You Want world. Now let's get back to Mis Sombras, because I wanted you to understand that when I sketch the Mis Sombras, like even if I'm just doodling, I feel like, oh, you're a guide. Now, and that's what I do call them. I call them guides. Mis Sombras means my shadows in Spanish. And I love languages. I'm not fluent in any language other than English at the moment. However, I have been studying other languages for years, and I like to know a little bit about lots of different languages. And so you will find that within Mis Sombras, there are names and references and different things scattered throughout that pull from other cultures and other languages. This is not only English. And you may or may not understand the meanings of those other words that you might see. You might not even recognize them as coming from another language, but people who do, which people have left me notes before saying that they felt a connection when they saw words from their language intertwined within the Mis Sombras world. And that is one thing I intend to continue to do, and hopefully it will continue to weave even deeper throughout this world as it weaves even deeper throughout my own personal world. So I may be all over the place, but maybe I'm not all over the place. So let me take a breath and figure out where I'm at. Okay. The second generation and then the first generation. So let me go back to the Tell a Vision show. I'm kind of telling y'all my vision right now for Mis Sombras and how it all came about. So I've got all of these sketches and stuff, and so far the world has only seen 13. So many exist, but they exist in sketchbooks. So let me tell y'all what my process is. Originally, the very first one I ever did, it was like I sketched something on the first page of a blank notebook. And it ended up being, it would later become Charmed. If y'all are familiar with the guides, then you will know who Charmed is. But at the time, it was just some creature that came out of me, and I actually colored it. And as you know, or maybe you don't know, the guides, when they present to the world, they present as really kind of graphic illustrations, which is definitely the graphic designer in me, the graphic artist in me, the cartoon animator in me. I love that cartoony. That's just my style. I love it. And so that's how they come through, not full of color. Now, the color comes when they find their place in the world on artwork as a background. We'll get into that in a minute. But they come through right as just outlines. Color's not a part. But the very first one, it was the first page of a brand new sketchbook, a blank sketchbook. And there it came. And I did color it. And then I wrote next to it, like hello beautiful or hello gorgeous or something like that. And I continued to sketch lots of them in this journal and other things, not yet knowing what it would become. I wasn't like, I'm going to start something called Mis Sombras and let me start to sit here and draw things that can be a Mis Sombras. It was not like that at all. It was, I kept drawing and creating, and they just kept showing up. Okay. And look, for years, I'm thinking that like I'm creating them. And what I did not realize was that they were slowly creating me. And this is part of the realization that came later, which makes it even more beautiful, because sometimes you don't even realize how magical of a thing that you're inside of when you're inside of it. You're just doing the thing. So I had an art studio downtown where I was working and playing and spending the night and living and being part of that urban city life and riding my bike around and walking, and I loved it. And I had different things on the wall in there, paintings and whatnot that had been thrifted or whatever. This stop sign I had gotten at a flea market that I went to with my parents. It was like in Canton, Texas or something. I got it at some vendor, and I had painted on the backside of it while I had that art studio downtown. I'd painted like the sun with the ocean and this like trident, and again, it really graphic. And it was hanging on the wall downtown at the art studio. And so anyway, I'd had this stuff. It was surrounding me. It was in the bedroom down there. It was in the art studio, the room with the printers and stuff. That, this stuff was already hanging. It was already surrounding me. And one day I just had this, there was this print, this canvas that I had thrifted. And it was just like, my intuition was like, take it off the wall and paint that thing onto it. And I did. And I painted what would be Charmed. I didn't know. I just redrew it on the canvas and I painted it in black outline with the stuff behind it, which is like people on a beach. And then I sat down after with it, I got my crystals, got my incense, all my things, and kind of meditated with it. And through that meditation, this name comes, and so does this whole download. So I type it in my computer, I put it all down, and I'm like, oh, there's something here. And so one by one, I'm like taking shit off the walls, and I'm like realizing that different. And then I would, based on maybe the shape of it, it was like, what wants to go on here? And it was this process of the art, the paintings were speaking to me, or the guides in the notebook were speaking to me of who wanted to go where. And I was using some old paintings that I had done. I was some just paintings. It's like, how sometimes, well, maybe you don't know, artists will know people who paint. Sometimes you paint stuff and you don't even know why you painted it. You painted it and it just sits or maybe you decided you didn't like it or whatever. So I was pulling all these old things that were just unfinished pieces and realizing, oh, this is a background for a guide. And so this started coming to life, and I realized, the same process. So I never would draw it, so I would pencil sketches, really rough pencil sketches. If y'all have ever seen my What You Want Collector's zine, I actually have some pictures of the pencil sketches in there, and I have a picture of the very first one, and I talk about a little bit about it in there. It's pretty neat. But so that became my process. So once I would decide on a guide and a canvas, and I use the word canvas again. Canvas could be a piece of wood. It could be a stop sign. It could be a literal canvas, meaning the canvas for the original artwork. Once I choose the canvas, and the guide, then that's the first time it really gets a real drawing. It comes out of the sketchbook and I do the final sketch onto the canvas, whatever I'm going to do it on, and then I paint it. And after is when I sit and meditate with it's a ritual. And then and there's not a specified length of time for the meditation. I come out of meditation whenever I feel like the meditation is done. And from that, everything is written. And after I do that, then I take a picture of the original painting. I put it on my iPad and I basically go over that on Adobe Illustrator with my Apple Pencil, and I create a digital line drawing of it. And that is the one that I upload onto my website, which is when you scan the QR code for each guide, it takes you to the landing page for that guide, which is where you read their intuitive message, their, how to embody that guide and all of these sorts of things. So I realized, because they had stories, that, oh, this is interactive. This is art and my writing together, and my holistic lifestyle worldview. It's all where it all comes together. And I realized that these guides, that there needed to be a portal so that the humans could receive the transmission, and QR codes was the natural fit in this day and age, and it worked. And so that's the guides have a digital presence as well. And when you meet a guide, and this is how I interpret it, is when you meet a guide, it's when you're meant to cross paths with that guide. And then if you're curious, then you can follow the lead and you can receive the transmission by entering the portal, scanning the code, opening it up. And when I did the first generation, I wasn't calling them the first generation. It was just meet the guides of Mis Sombras. Now that I'm in the second generation, I am referring to that as first generation and second generation, because I realized something now that I couldn't have known at the time, that, oh, this is how they're meant to be born. This is just how it feels right in my body, is to do it this way. So I realized, when Jay gave us the opportunity with the TV, and so I got to sit with it already knowing, okay, this is going to be the opening for the second generation to be brought into the world. And I'm telling my vision, because Jay said, how do you interpret that? Tell a vision. Interpret it the way you want. And so what came through, because I meditated on this for sure, was that, first, before what came through, I was like, I wanted to see what guide matched this. So before I thought of anything else, I got my sketchbooks out and I started to just flip through them. And I ended up finding this head. There was no body. There was no anything. It was just a face. It was a head. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, that's the one. That's the one. It felt so, and as soon as I saw it, just a pencil sketch of a head, I recognized antenna, third eye, asleep, noise, reception, like all of this stuff. I was like, oh my God, this is the one. And so because I already had the TV and it's a horizontal, like a landscape rectangle, and I only had the head, I was like, now I can create the body based on what the medium, what the canvas is offering. And that's why I said, I don't, just because sometimes when I'm sketching them, I'll be like, oh, there you are. And it feels complete. And I don't keep pushing it. I don't force myself to finish a sketch, or I'm not like, it has to have a body or I can't move on. No, sometimes literally all that wants to come through at that time is just enough for you to recognize it when the time is right for it to be born into the world. And that's what happened. So now that I had the head, it was so clear. Guys, have you seen it? I mean, it's like perfect for this concept. I didn't have to think about anything. This all just happened on its own. I realized this is a signal being that is emerging through static with a portal to a transmission located at heart center. Like, that was what needed to happen. So at that point, this is static. This guide is the signal being coming through the static. So I wanted it to be open to receive. And that's why these fluid, long arms came out. Plus, I had the width of the TV to spread them out wide. And then I didn't want traditional hands, or I didn't want paws, or I didn't want claws. It felt like discs, like receiving, like big platters to receive, and like a satellite dish, just to pick up the signal. And then, because this spanned out wide, it wasn't like it needed legs or this body. It felt like, and I kept hearing heart center, and I'm like, it's just this kind of heart-shaped body, like almost like a top that you could just spin it, And as soon as I drew it all on there, I was like, this feels right. There you are. there you are. Hello, friend. You know? And so I have never tried to paint static before. So that was fun. Just really, there were so many times. This is such a trust the process. I did document it. It was something maybe interesting to share one day, but the process of getting that static effect on the TV, there were some points in time when I was intuitively making like different strokes and motions. And then I would step back and I was like, what did you do? Like, you just messed up this whole thing. And then I would hear this voice say, trust the process, keep going. And I mean, there were many times that I was like, what did I do? This does not look like static. This is not going to look like static. But I kept going. And it ended up being, I love the way it came out. And I realized that this is the first guide that's not a solid white or a solid black, really cartoony, animated, chunky line. This is literally a signal being emerging from the static. So some parts are kind of staticked away altogether. Some parts you can barely see. Some parts are, like, particularly around the third eye, are, black, dark, intentional. But that was part of it. And then and I've never done this before, but the actual QR code is embedded onto the artwork itself. And because of the nature of the QR code, and I did the smallest you could do where you could still really pick it up on a phone because I wanted it to kind of blend in. And look, I've had some people say, I didn't even see it the first time. I didn't even notice the QR code the first time. And I'm like, good, because it's there for people who are tuned in and who do see it. That's who it's there for. And so that was something new that I'd never felt called to do before, but it felt so appropriate for this piece. Calma is the name. I didn't know that at the time, but Calma was asking to be represented in a new way. And I was like, all right, let's do this, And so after I got it all done, and I really was just like, okay, I'm digging it. Yeah. And then it was time to meditate, the whole ritual. And the thing is that I didn't do this immediately after. I sat with it in the studio completed for a couple days before I felt ready to sit down and to sit with it. And once I did, the message was clear that was coming through. And Calma was the name. And I will leave a link in the show notes for you to check it out so you can read it for yourself. But another thing that I had already decided I was going to do was for this second generation, I wanted the format where people receive the message to change. And so what I call that is my guide bio design. I wanted to redesign the user experience when they entered the portal, because before it was just like a long list of information, and at the very top it was like, welcome to the world of Mis. I'm explaining what Mis Sombras is because it was such a new concept and I felt like I needed to explain it to people because they didn't know. It was just, there was all this stuff beforehand. I would notice as people would scan it when I would take it different places, some people would just read the one message and think, oh, that's it. And I'm like, well, you got to keep scrolling. And then I started to notice the consistent patterns of how people were receiving the messages, and I recognized there was room for improvement to make it a more engaging experience on the user's end. And so I came up with this idea to do some drop-down menus and just to really make the whole experience more interactive. And I implemented that for this second generation, for Calma. And as soon as I put it out into the world, again, July 10th of this month of this year, 2026, is when it first went out. And I got to get some feedback from people who had experienced both ways. And it was unanimous that everyone really does love this second generation design better. So the next project is and I've begun this, I have not had a chance to complete all 13 guides, but the next project is to update the Generation 1 guides with the new guide bio redesign that I launched with Generation 2. So I'm excited about that because it is certainly a richer, more engaging, more interactive experience than the first go round because I've learned so much. That first generation was me discovering the world even existed. And this second generation has come from the wisdom that has come in the years since that first show, since that first time to have all the guides together in one space with mirrors everywhere. Intentionally did that show at a hair salon at Lux Salon. Nathan and Greg, the owners, they have been dear to me truly since I was a teenager, and they hold a special place in my heart. And they have seen me through every version. And the salon, I was sitting in the chair one day and I was actually looking in a mirror, this huge, gorgeous mirror right in front of each of their chairs. And I was looking in it and I had reclaimed this mirror. They had asked me somewhere along the way, hey, could you restore this? We want to change the look of it. We're doing some things in the salon. And I was like, oh my gosh, of course. So gave a second life to these mirrors, and I'm looking around and, you look in a mirror and you see other mirrors that reflect other things. And there's just something wonderful about that. And it felt right. And I was like, oh my gosh, what do y'all think about doing the art show here? And it was really cool because it was immersive. There were interactive prompts and things throughout the show. And starting with when you even walked in the door, there was my friend Kelly was greeting you and guiding you to choose which guide was speaking to you. You would tie a ribbon, or it was actually a piece of yarn, upcycled yarn. You would tie a yarn that was associated. Each guide had a certain color yarn. And based on which guide you chose, there were certain experiences that you could have. And all that to say. So one of the things I'm doing is updating Generation 1 with this new fun. Once you scan the QR code and you enter the portal, right, it's going to be a new experience. Now, the other fun thing is that since Calma has entered the world, the other 12 in Generation 2 are right behind. So that is something I am going to be releasing this year, perhaps even an art show this year. That's something that's been swirling around. So I've been considering a couple different venues for this second generation show. And I'm really excited to see how it's all going to unfold and where it'll end up being. I'm not going to pretend like I know all the answers right now because I don't, but this is what I'm feeling. It's all happening now. So as a reminder, well, you heard what I had said, that little intro I added. I accidentally clipped off part of this episode. And honestly, I'm pretty sure that there was a good bit that I clipped off. But I also feel like after listening back, I feel like I've said what I wanted to say for now. And I want to invite you, if you're tuning in and it's before August 14th, I want to invite you to head to downtown Baton Rouge to the Arts Council of Greater Baton Rouge, the Shell Gallery, which is inside. That's where the television show is being held. And you can see all of these amazing TVs that have been reimagined into incredible art, amazing art, fun art. And you can see Calma for yourself. And I'm also, there's one more thing that I will say about this second generation, because this is something that I've noticed, and this is important to say. So the festival happened. I still haven't talked about the festival. I still haven't gone through the archive of all the photos and videos and everything and organized it all yet to share, because I'm still really inside of it in lots of different ways. In lots of ways, I'm still inside of it. Now, all that to say, so the festival, and then the art show, and then the harvesting of the festival, which is what I considered it, which was deconstructing this world that was built and harvesting it and deciding where everything goes. And then, so my permanent life was disrupted to create this temporary world. And so then everything has to be deconstructed, transport to its location, which was either art studio, my home, my white space, or if I had borrowed it from a friend or family member, it had to go back to its respective home. Then it was the process of now that I have all this stuff just in my living room or stacked up in my art studio or stacked up at the white space, now it's all got to be reconstructed and reorganized into these permanent systems and things that were disrupted for this to happen. And so in the process of all of this happening, I was like, well, I'll be darned. Look at all the shadows that are being cast into the light, like my own shadows being cast into the light. This whole process is really because in the midst of all of this, if you listened to last week's episode, you would also know, or if you've been following along with some of the real-time stories I've been sharing on Instagram, then you'll know that I also received the entire assignment, so to speak, a really, really big vision. And this is something that I've been leaning into. And with all of this happening, I've become, again, I've shined the light of my consciousness on shadows, on some of these areas that I was unaware of, that I was unconscious of, are now right here out in the light for me to see and to say, all right, so let's integrate. And it's perfect timing because I had just established the fact that second generation, it's on its way. And now look at all this raw material, this draw from personal experience, draw from wisdom. Again, because truly living with the guides for the last 2 to 2.5 years since the art show, since they were all released, living with them. And I truly mean living with them. Some of the guides, some of the original paintings have found their homes, and the rest of them, I love them. They fill my home, right? They are all around me. They're where I work. They're where I sleep. They're where I bathe. They're where I, cook. They're where I live. And so I've truly been living with the guides. And because of that, and the wisdom that comes, and the love, and the unconditional presence, and all of these things, it has shaped me. The guides really have. So I'm stoked to see how generation 2 comes into the light. Mis Sombras, it's my shadows. How is it going to step into the light? How is it going to present itself? I don't know. I do know some things, and some things that definitely will be different. Like the first generation, I was reaching for whatever I had. One of the reasons I was really struggling at the time with art and sustainability, and realizing that all of these paints and things that I had used really my whole life, they aren't vegan, which being plant-based and trying to, or making a conscious effort to live a plant-based life and a vegan-friendly life, including the products, not only the foods that I eat, that was like, oh my gosh. So like every paint that I've used, even the paint brushes. So I went through this period of like, trying to decide how I felt about it and what I wanted to do. It was like an internal consciousness type of back and forth. And until I felt, so what I was doing was like choosing almost, I don't want to say not to create, but it was like, how can I create without adding to and using more? And so the thrifting and the already existing items, that all is what I went with. I now have made peace with some of those things. I have found alternatives with some of those things. I've relaxed with some of those things. I've given myself grace with some of those things. It's a combination of lots of things. Again, this is just my personal journey as an artist who also happens to be plant-based, who also happens to value the environment and sustainability and eco-conscious practices. And so it can get overwhelming. But I want to live in integrity. And so I just I do the best I can, and really kind of like an 80-20 mindset helps. Like if I am 80% of the time being like super doing the thing, and then I leave some breathing room because I'm not perfect and it's life and you have to be flexible. So that's been helpful. I also like to do the best I can. And the more you know, the better you do, and that sort of thing too. So circling back around, what I've decided with Generation 2, I'm not going to, it'll still be upcycled. It'll still be repurposed. It'll be that. But one of the things I had done then was kind of some of these paintings I had thrifted or whatever, and it was other people's work. I've told this story before. And I had, of course, consulted with a copyright attorney before I did any of that. I was never making prints of any ones that I had used. And I also didn't alter or try to hide the signatures, right? And half of any sales from those was going back to that artist. But again, it was all complicated. I did what I did at the time because it was where I was at the time. Where I am now is all of the backgrounds will be my work. And I still appreciate work from other artists. And if I do thrift or flea market find or something, work from other artists, that doesn't mean I won't still enjoy it or hanging it in my house or do something like that. But I've just have different ideas about how I'm going to move forward with this collection. And there are other things too. So I'm just excited. It's all coming this year. And I'm going to wrap it up here. I've said what I feel like I said, I've said what I think I needed to come here and say. And go check out the television show. Go meet Calma. Go have your moment. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to Dreamed It Then Real Lifed It. I hope today's episode sparked something powerful within you. Remember, every step you take towards your vision counts, no matter how small. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please take a second to hit that subscribe button or leave a review. That would be amazing. Or share the podcast with someone who's ready to bring their dreams into reality too. And if you're looking to dive deeper, connect with me on social media at Dreamed It, Then Real Lifed It, or at BE_what you want. Or visit dreameditThenRealLifedIt.us for more resources on aligning your life, business, and dreams. Until next time, keep dreaming and keep manifesting your dreams into real life. Love you, friends.